During a review of the 2022 California Voter Guide, I became concerned about the lack of information on the candidates. I was looking for insights about the candidates' motivations to represent us in government, and I didn't really find the answers I was looking for. As a consequence, we've decided to host a series of open discussions with candidates who will be looking for your vote in the March 2024 primary. My name is Jim Connor. Welcome to Game Changers, Silicon Valley. My guest is Gus Mattammal, a candidate to represent the northern part of Silicon Valley, politically defined as California's Legislative District 23. Gus, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jim. I really appreciate you having me on. I think it's great what you're doing in trying to get candidates more visibility here in our district.
Great. Let's start with a kind of a discussion of what led you to decide to run for the California Assembly.
I actually grew up in Missouri, in St. Louis, inner city St. Louis. Tough neighborhood. I was the only kid in my neighborhood to graduate high school, let alone go to college. And college is actually what brought me to California. And I will never forget the day that I stepped off the train in Southern California and breathed the California air and felt the California sunshine on my face. And I said, this is the promised land. But that was 1990s, 33 years ago. And since then, we've now reached a point where California has lost population 3 years in a row. We've lost congressional representation, both those things, first time in our history as a state. And so I'm running because I love this state, the opportunities that it's given me, but it breaks my heart to see the direction that it's going. And I think the problems that we face are all quite solvable, actually, straightforwardly solvable, but it will take different people in the legislature to do it. So that's why I'm running, and I really hope I can get your vote and the votes of the folks watching the show.
Well, you've given me three wonderful topics to talk about. We're going to talk about land use or housing policy, talk about homelessness, which is a very emotional issue, and probably the most emotional of all issues, education. What are we doing with our young people, high school people, even college people, I suppose. So let's look at your position on land use policy or how housing is added to the communities.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So first of all, I absolutely agree that we have a housing crisis here. It's not good that our teachers, our first responders can't live anywhere close to where they work. At the same time, it's really amazing that we have a housing crisis that's getting worse, even though the state is losing population every year. I mean, that's an impressive level of terrible to have the housing crisis get worse, even with fewer people to house. So it's important, I think, to take a step back and ask, why did we end up with a housing crisis in the first place? So the reason we have a housing crisis is that for years, the legislature made it harder and harder and harder to build anything anywhere. And that led to much less supply relative to the amount of demand that there is, and that causes the prices to go up, and that's why housing is unaffordable. But that's the result of specific decisions that were made in the legislature. Now that we have the problem, which the legislature created, they're now trying to solve in the most Sacramento way possible, which is now to try to force housing absolutely everywhere, whether you want it or not, in your neighborhood. A very one-size-fits-all blanket policy. And that's not only was it terrible policy that led to the problem in the first place, this is now a terrible way to solve it. Because our neighborhoods are emotional places for us, right? I live on the coast side in El Granada. I love it there. Part of why I love it is that it's not super developed. It's not Miami Beach. But one of the bills in the legislature is to override the Coastal Commission so that they can shove more housing onto the coast side. That's an emotional issue for me and for everyone who lives there. So my policy is, instead of just trying to force it absolutely everywhere, let's look at what are the places that people are not emotionally attached to. For instance, El Camino. Is anybody out there actually emotionally attached to El Camino? It's 25 miles of what are largely strip malls. And if we just redeveloped along there, you could fit thousands more units of housing. So my proposal would be, if it's a redevelopment along El Camino or other streets like that, for instance, Tully Road in San Jose or Stevens Creek down in Cupertino, these big 6-lane thoroughfares. If it's right along the road, 3 stories or less, and designates 15% of its units to be below market in cost, then I would give it automatic approval. And further, I would say I would exempt it from any state level regulations. So it would only have federal regulations apply to it. So if you're someone who's concerned about the environment, good news, there are federal regulations that protect the environment. If you're someone who's concerned about labor, good news, there are federal regulations around labor. All that stuff already exists. What California did was layer on a whole bunch of other things that made it really hard to build. So we'll just exempt you from all of that. That will allow housing to get built faster, cheaper, and it will spread the affordable housing out uniformly in the area. I grew up in a very low-income, heavily minority district. I know exactly what happens when you concentrate too many low-income people in one place. What happens is you create a desert around it of businesses. And with that desert, what moves into the desert? All the things you don't want that turn neighborhoods into bad areas. So it's not that low-income people are bad. It's that you create a desert and then all the bad stuff moves into it. So under my proposal, it would spread out the affordability all along these corridors, which, by the way, are transit corridors also, so will help with people getting where they need to go, not adding too much to the traffic, all that kind of stuff. So that is a smart, sensible policy. I call it smart housing. Nice, smart, sensible balance between getting the housing that we need without forcing it into everybody's neighborhoods.
That's a very insightful explanation, because a couple thoughts I want to just give you some feedback is, people who live in the state here, me included, really don't like this whiplash. 20, 30 years, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're restricted. Oh, gee, we have a housing crisis after compounding the problem for 30 years. Now we're going to force housing to be developed. And this one-size-fits-all has really got people riled up, in the sense that we live in the peninsula here, San Francisco, San Jose Peninsula. And what we see, and I hear people talking about it, these communities that are pretty tightly packed geographically. It's not city density, but it's residential density, not a lot of free land.
Right.
And these cities are given a mandate that you're either going to be, the state will sue you if you don't build so much housing.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute. Where are we going to put it? And you have to have some low-income housing in there. Maybe, in fact, it's preferable to the state that it's all low-income housing. People are really upset about this. I think it's a turning point. I think it's a point at which people say, maybe we've had enough. A, the whiplash is not very comfortable, and two, saying one size fits all. It's one thing, as we'll just say, to go, and I don't want to use any cities that are not happy with it, but maybe you go out to the Central Valley where there's more land available. You go where you could tear down a lot of old housing, maybe old factories that aren't being used, and build housing there. So
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential.
So there's quite a bit of
east.
traction for you in that area.
Yeah, and I would say, housing is something, you're emotionally attached to your neighborhood, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or conservative, right? This is an issue that transcends R's and D's. So I think it's an issue where there's plenty of room for Republicans and Democrats to work together on this, to have better policy, and I'm absolutely willing to do that.
Well, I want to go into the homeless issue, because that's another huge issue, and my hat's off for you willing to take that on publicly. So what is your position of how do we deal with the homeless situation?
So first of all, part of it is understanding kind of what is the policy now. So the policy now they call housing first, and that has been the policy since 2016 in the state of California, coincidentally, exactly when my opponent in this race, my primary opponent, the incumbent, first came to the legislature. So he is been voting with all this stuff for the last 8 years. So housing first has been the policy for the last 8 years. It says no matter what, whatever your issue is, we're first just going to put you into some kind of housing and hope that everything else kind of takes care of itself. That isn't the approach I personally would have chosen, but that's what we've been doing for the last 8 years. And I would just ask everyone out there to just think for a second about, okay, we've been trying it that way for 8 years. Does the homelessness situation look like it's getting better? And by the way, we spent $20 billion of your taxpayer dollars on this policy. Does it look like it's getting better? Because if the answer is no, then, in my opinion, the answer is no. It seems pretty clear from looking at San Francisco, from looking at San Jose, from looking even in places like Palo Alto, that it's not getting better. So what I would propose is healing first as the policy. So with that policy, I want to try to understand what are the different reasons why someone is homeless, because there are many different reasons that it could be. Yes, it's of course possible that somebody simply couldn't make their rent, but there are a lot of other reasons that I think if you walk around, certainly walk around downtown San Francisco and take a look at the homeless population there, doesn't look like it's just rent, right? There's substance abuse, there's mental health issues. There are a lot of things that a lot of factors that can work together to put someone in that situation. And so a healing first policy would say, okay, let's identify what are the different reasons why you're homeless first, and then let's address those. So for instance, if you have mental health issues, let's get you into some kind of long-term program that can address the mental health issues, and then start stepping you up to reintegrate you into society. So once we've got the mental health under control, then we can think about things like job training, and then get you into some kind of then we can get you into transitional housing, because now you'll have some income, and eventually bring you back into society to get you healed, to get you back to being someone living a purposeful life. If there's substance abuse, let's put you in a long-term program to get you detoxed. And then, if you have both mental illness and substance abuse, let's get you into a probably longer-term program to address both of those issues. Then again, step you up into job training and then transitional housing and then get you back into society. So step by step, a thoughtful process, as opposed to just putting someone into permanent supportive housing and then hoping it all works out. A huge fraction of the drug overdoses last year in San Francisco were people in permanent supportive housing. Because, just intuitively, I would say to anyone listening here, what do you think happens when you take someone with a hardcore drug problem and put them alone in a room with access to an open-air drug market nearby? What do you think is going to happen? They're just going to do drugs until they're dead. And then that person has, family, friends who then have to get the news that someone they love died alone with this untreated issue.
I do have a question about this. So, why hasn't the Democratic, legislature, which is a supermajority, why have they done nothing visible about this?
This gets me back to the fundamental root problem that underlies the housing, the homelessness, schools. The reason why none of this stuff is getting better, in most cases it's getting worse, is that we have a state that's dominated by just one party. And policy only goes through one party. With so few Republicans in the legislature, the Democrats can literally just ignore us, and they do just ignore us. And without policy having to go through both parties, you not only get the good ideas, you also get the bad ideas. Like, there's no process to weed out the bad ideas. Only when policy has to go through both parties do the best ideas survive. The best ones will survive, and that's why you get good policy. That's how we built this state in the first place. You need two parties in relative balance with each other, and that's why, I think it's of course the responsibility of my party to offer candidates that I think are, that are thoughtful and approachable for voters here, and here I am. I'm hoping you find me thoughtful and approachable. So, and that's the first step toward bringing the balance back, and that's how we'll get good policy again. So that's why I'm running.
Very good. Well, that's an excellent, insightful explanation, so thank you. The big one now is about education. And man, how could a state with so much innovation, so much intelligence, so much worldwide leading universities have such a poor performance in the area of education? I'll let you give us your explanation.
Thanks so much. Education is a real passion issue for me. It's my business is private tutoring. I built that business here. It's a multi-million-dollar business now. It exists in a dozen states, employs almost 50 people. But just kind of going back, let me tell you just a little story. When I was in 7th grade, I was in an outside program for gifted math students, and so math class in school is actually pretty boring. And my math teacher, Ms. Hurley, he had 3 problem children. One was me, because I was bored and I don't react well to boredom. And 2, these guys, Charles and Orrin, were legendary class disruptors. They could really tank a class in a lot of really creative ways. And one day, she'd had enough of the 3 of us, and she looked at me and she said, "You, take Charles and Orrin to that table in the back and teach them this." And I said, huh? That seemed like a strange thing to say, but she just banished the 3 of us to the back. And for the first couple of days, I think all we did was chat. But after a couple of days, we were out of things to talk about. And I very, very vividly remember saying to them, "So do you guys know how to do that?" And they were like, "No." I was like, "Do you want to learn?" And they said, "Okay." And that was actually how I got started teaching myself, which has now led to a whole career in tutoring. And the reason I tell you that story is that when we look at our education system here in the state, we have a 2-tiered education system. Like, if you graduate 8th grade in the Ravenswood School District, you are probably 1 to 2 grades behind a kid graduating 8th grade in Menlo, which is just a mile away, right? There's this gulf between the schools that perform well and the schools that perform poorly. Our school district on the coast side, it struggles relative to like Saratoga, for instance. So the question is, how do you address that that gap, that delta between the performance of the better schools and the performance of the struggling schools. And that gap has existed now for over a generation here. The Democrats have done nothing about it. So here's what I would propose, and it's based on my own experience. Oftentimes, people propose things that have to do with trying to get kids extra help, tutoring, that kind of thing. The problem with that is there are a lot of schools, which means you need tons and tons of people who are willing to do this tutoring. And I can tell you, as someone in the tutoring business, you can't find that many people willing to do it and have any kind of control over quality. So here's what I propose instead. I would propose a pilot program which would start in schools within the bottom 10% of performing districts. So these are schools that most need help. They are overwhelmingly minority-dominated schools in low-income areas. And I would create a fund that would allow a teacher in a class to identify one or two students that are the students who are performing well. And we would pay them minimum wage to be TAs. So that solves a whole bunch of problems at once. So number one, you don't have to find outside tutoring help. The teacher knows which one or two students in the class are the strongest students. Those students get income. So this would be driving income into low-income families that really need it and would reward academic performance. And now the teacher can say, okay, you one or two students work with these kids who need the most help, and now the teacher has now reduced the number of students that they have to engage with, sort of shaved off the end of the spectrum, and can really drive that middle group further than she could if if she also has to manage to the lower performing and the higher performing students. So this program drives income into families that need it, creates instant support within the classroom for the teachers, allows the teacher to focus his or her efforts, and that's, I think, something that could actually produce some meaningful change in performance in these classrooms. And we'll target the most struggling schools first, tweak the program to make sure that it's working, and then we can start to scale it from there.
I think that's an excellent idea going forward. I hope you can get that idea across one way or another. So
I do too.
Good. Well, Gus, I want to thank you. We're kind of out of time.
Of course.
And I want to ask you to give our audience opportunity to understand how to meet you,
Mm-hmm.
how to get engaged with your campaign, how to make a donation if you're looking for donations, and please do.
Absolutely. So, of course, there are a lot of ways to engage with my campaign. You can volunteer, give a donation. Of course, it's a political campaign. Would love to have that. You can do all of those things on my website, which is Gus for California. So GUSFORCA.com. So GUSFORCA.com. All those things are available there.
Great. And this is your first. I know you've been in politics once before, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I actually serve on the city council where I live on the coast side. So we call it the Mid-Coast Council. It's for the 12,000 people who live between Half Moon Bay and Pacifica. So I serve on the council there. I actually also serve on San Mateo County Transportation Authority's Citizens Council, so I advise on transportation issues.
All right, so you're a moderate-sized business, successful business, dealing with people, dealing with issues in education, and you've been on 2 government councils, it looks like. So it seems like those are pretty strong qualifications.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Jim. And I'm really excited to hopefully represent folks in the legislature. And again, I would just say to, particularly to all the Democrats out there who are listening, that I'm not asking anybody to change their political identity. I'm asking you to realize that the reason we're on the wrong track as a state is because we're out of balance. And so, voting for me is just a step toward bringing that balance back.
Very good. Well, Gus, thanks so much for coming in.
Of course.
I want to wish you every success going forward.
Thank you so much, Jim. I really appreciate having the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thanks for joining us in this episode. If you gained insights from this conversation, share this show with your network. If you are a candidate for elected office, contact us to learn more about being a guest on the show. You can view all shows at our website, GameChangers.tv, as well as the podcast, Game Changers Silicon Valley. We look forward to your continued interest in upcoming shows.